What's the best I told you so moment? I was in freight. I delivered a pallet that was supposed to have 750 pieces. It looked a little short, so I asked the customer to count it. He refused 3 times after I explained to him if it was short, they're going to deny your claim. He said, "Don't worry." I said, "Okay," and noted it on the paperwork that he refused to count. He signed it. 2 weeks later, he called the customer service rep to report a shortage and make a claim. The customer service rep called me and asked if I remember it. I said, "Yep, read the notes." She said, "Oh, he refused to count it. Claim denied. Thanks. Bye. LOL. Yeah, those people who are confident about their own rights are like the worst ever. They get mad at you for their own mistakes. Story 2. Ex-boss, who I was not fond of, had a vehicle he wanted to sell. He met someone he wanted to make payments on it, used a private party, but took possession when they made the first payment. I told him not to do it. I said it was almost certain they would crash the car and then just stop paying and he'll be left with a damaged car and no money. He told me I was dumb and went ahead with the deal. Okay, whatever you say. For a couple months, things were good and he was pretty smug. Then he comes in one day and tells me to research what happens if the above scenario happens. And the car was in a tow yard collecting fees. He wanted to know if he was responsible for the fees. I need to look it up. Yup, if you want the car back, you are. Story 3. In the late 80s, I worked for my MIL as a regional manager of her business. I worked for very long hours for $500 a week. At some point, I told her that I deserved a raise. She asked me how much I thought I deserved, and I replied that she couldn't replace me for less than $1,000 a week. She responded that she was sure that she could, so I said, "Fine, show me." She had trouble finding someone and finally had to pay the $1,000, but after 2 weeks, he was totally incapable of doing what I did, so she had to split it into 2 regions and hire a second guy at $1,000 a week. After 6 months, she discovered that they teamed up to embezzle about $15,000. Of course, she never acknowledged to anyone, especially not me, that I was right and she messed up badly. Story 4. Working at a tire shop, customer brings in a Land Rover Range Rover with air suspension for a set of tires. I watch the tire changers start to set their little scissor lift under the frame to pick it up, and I go over and stop them. I tell them that they should take it down to the second drive-on rack and use the swing jacks under the axles, or else they're going to blow out the suspension. The assistant manager overhears this and comes out into the shop saying that, "I just called Land Rover and they said that to turn off the air, right, all you have to do is open the rear hatch and turn the hazard lights on. Just pick it up where it is and get on with it. The customer's waiting." At that point, I said, "Well, you heard the man. I'm going to go back down my toolbox. Holler if you need me." About a minute and a half later, what sounds like a shotgun blast is heard throughout the shop. They lifted the truck by the frame and blew out all 4 suspension airbags, just like I said would happen. They eventually wound up putting it on the drive-on lift and using the swing jacks, just like I told them to do. Then the customer got to drive all the way from Manassas, VA to Alexandria, VA on the bump stops where the shop I was working for paid $6,000 for a set of used suspension airbags to be installed. God forbid the guy who's actually worked on Land Rovers before might know what he's talking about. Even if I had only been at that particular shop for 3 days, at least they started listening to me when I told them stuff. Story 5. As a teacher, telling the head principal at my school that the way they were misusing the alternate assessment program to boost standardized test scores was not just a huge burden on teachers, but also illegal and likely to attract the scrutiny of the State Department of Education. He handed me a crappy assignment for the next year. I quit, and he ended up having to take that assignment, teaching 16 kids with emotional disorders across 3 grade levels in one classroom for the first month and a half of the school year because they couldn't find anybody to take my place. I heard later that year that they came down hard on him for the scheme he'd concocted and ended up shutting down the alternative assessment program altogether. I told you so, DL. Yep, sweet, sweet justice. Karma's a witch, isn't it? Story 6. When I was 13 years old, I found out my brother was selling substances out of my parents' house. He used to tell them he was giving away McDonald's coupons that he got from working the drive-thru. We lived in a very nice neighborhood, and I knew the influx of cars would attract police attention. After asking him to stop several times, I finally caved and told my parents. I was literally in tears because I felt guilty snitching on him. I felt like I had no other choice because he was going to be ruining his life. When I told my parents, they accused me of being jealous of him for having a better grades in school and calling me a liar. He was able to continue on for 2 years before finally getting caught. Our home was raided and he was on the 5 o'clock news that evening. My mother watched and sobbed, and I couldn't help but say, "I told you so." What could have been an easy conversation ended in federal charges and several $100,000 in lawyer fees. Story 7. I was a contractor managing stormwater ponds, happy to field questions on the topic. Cattails are usually bad because they grow so aggressively they'll clog inflow-outflow pipes and take up the flood storage volume. Also often are monocultures with little ecological value. I had a manager I supervised who kept saying, "We don't have to sub that out to some company. I can rent an excavator and get all the cattails out, roots and all." He was a sketchy mechanic sort of character. Always had a MacGyver solution and always double dipping with work equipment. I finally approved his scheme to rent a Mini X. Guess who gets a Tim? I messed up. FaceTime 15 minutes later. Me. I drive across the state to get on site and see he submerged the excavator in the pond and ran it so water sucked up the intake. We had to daisy chain two F-350s to the tow truck to tow the frickin' thing 6 feet. He ended up buying it from the rental place, repairing it, and flipping it. Story 8. When my younger brother fell through the ice while crossing a creek when we were kids around 11 and 9, it was only slightly higher than knee-deep on us and slow-moving, so not a high risk of drowning. However, a very uncomfortable half-mile walk back to the house in 45-degree Fahrenheit weather. I told him the ice was too thin to cross there and we could cross maybe 300 feet upstream where it was ankle-deep water that was still frozen pretty solid, but I wasn't the boss of him. 4 steps later, and he's up to his armpits. What made it better was the entire whining walk home. He thought he would be in big trouble with Mom. However, one look at the waddling, pitiful mess, and my mom broke out in laughter as she helped him out of the clothes. It gets funnier. He was mad that she wasn't mad and was shouting about how it's not funny and why isn't he in trouble? Isn't he grounded or something? Which leads to Mom running out of breath because she's laughing so hard now, he ends up storming to his room without being sent there. Story 9. I warned my partner that I neither liked nor trusted a friend and colleague of his, and gave a detailed list of things that said friend had said or did that rang my alarm bells regarding his arrogance and trustworthiness. My partner brushed it off saying, "I'm too sensitive and slightly biased." First chance this guy got, he inflated his abilities and experience in a way that caused an internal company crisis and could get him fired. My partner had a quiet word with him to try to warn him he was making a huge mistake and, in return, got belittled and gaslit in a lengthy, blame-shifting message that ended with a jaunty, "Let's agree to disagree. When are we going for beers?" The best part for me was I didn't even have to say "I told you so" because my partner was stomping around going, you were right all along, and I should have listened to you." Story 10. I was working in a factory that had very large pieces of machinery with large gearboxes about the size of one of those smart cars. I noticed during my shift that while idling, one of the machines had a small spike in current draw every revolution of the motor. Idle was about 15 RPM, so you could see it on the monitors. I put a screwdriver up against the gearbox casing and listened to it, and I could hear something sticking and then popping free as it turned. I told the supervisor that a bearing was right on the point of failure and we needed to shut it down immediately for maintenance. He ignored my warning and proceeded to queue up a job for the night shift running at 80% max load for 9+ hours. I shrugged and went home. At about 2 a.m., the gearbox failed catastrophically, causing what the crew reported as a small earthquake, as the entire building shook. I turned up for my next shift, and once they explained what happened, I just looked at the supervisor and said, "Told you so." The machine was down for nearly a year, and the new gearbox had to be custom fabricated and imported from Italy because they didn't want a couple of days downtime for preventive maintenance. Oh, yes, that one, the sweet sound of "I told you so." Story 11. I had a coworker, let's call her Tina, who proudly stated that she had been substance-free for 6 months, but her boyfriend, who had lived in their car, was still using. She lived in an apartment by herself, but this guy had broken into her place several times looking for stuff to sell for money. Another coworker and her boyfriend had been hanging out with Tina. They grew close and offered to let her live with them. I told them that was a bad idea because she hadn't been clean that long, and if her BF was shady enough to break into her place, what would stop him from breaking into theirs? Their lease was up in just over a month, but they had a new place a couple towns over. They told Tina she could stay there by herself until the lease was up and she'd have to move out by then. They came back to their old place a month later to see that Tina had gotten back with her ex, started using again, and had robbed them blind. Found all this out from another coworker, and when I asked why they were telling me and not our friends, their response was, "They were too embarrassed to admit that you were right." Story 12. I worked for a company that took private school students hiking and adventuring for short 3 to 5 day experiences. We hired a guy that had extensive outdoor experience to join the team. From when he started, I got a vibe that this guy does whatever the heck he wants and all on his schedule, and that everyone else should consider themselves lucky that they get to work with him. I started to notice him cutting corners and doing a few things that I would consider unsafe, especially since we weren't just adventuring solo. We were doing this as our job with clients. I talked to the boss about this on several occasions, but he swept it under the rug and ignored me most of the times because it never escalated to anything serious. After about a year of this, I couldn't stand it anymore and submitted an official complaint to the boss, outlining some serious safety concerns and how I had raised them before but to no avail and wanted my concerns on the record. As luck would have it, about 24 hours after I submitted my email, this guy blundered big time, hiked students into an area I had repeatedly told him they shouldn't go because of poor access in the event of an emergency, and took them swimming in a flowing river. This was not the first time he had done this. I later found out, but he had just been able to get away with it. However, this time the river was up and flowing more than usual. Half of the group was swept away in the river and were separated from him. Fortunately, nobody was seriously hurt, but one young lady was hurt enough that she required evacuation. This was made extremely difficult given the area they were in and the fact that the group was separated by fast-flowing water. I later found out that the two halves of the group both thought that the other half had perished because many hours went by before the new guy was able to make contact with the half that wasn't swept away. Poor kids, and I'm all for adventure, which is why I love the job, but there were so many warning signs that he and my boss ignored. Story 13. I was operations manager for a small family-run company. I was putting in 80-plus hour weeks, rarely getting a full day off. One new employee had trouble completing their job, which was extremely easy, and kept interrupting me while I was doing one of my jobs. I told them to go ask one of my bosses since she knew exactly what to do. Later that day, I got called into the office and was asked if I thought my pay rate was too much for what I was doing. I asked the boss what they meant by that, and they said, "I don't think you are worth the amount we're already paying you since you can't handle the job you have." I asked if they meant telling the new guy to go ask them about something on their contract, and they said, "Yes, it's lazy and unprofessional to have someone interrupt the owner when they are working." I walked out to catch some air and literally received a call for an interview at a much higher paying job that I had applied for about a year earlier. I told the person on the phone that I could literally do the interview that day if needed. They agreed, and I took a break and drove up to the interview and walked out with the job. I came back to work and put in my 2 weeks' notice and said, "If you think I'm not worth my weight, that's okay, but you'll need at least 4 people to replace me." 2 months later, they had to hire 5 people just to handle what I did. Story 14. I partook in physics research during undergrad in the early 2010s, and we did a field trip to LIGO, a large-scale experiment for detecting gravitational waves, which had never been observed at the time. Afterwards, an arrogant classmate of mine wouldn't shut up about how the experiment was a waste of time and how it will never work. I would always pick fights with this guy because he was so condescending and would try putting everyone beneath him. So I started defending the experiment, saying how there are many scientists much more knowledgeable than him working on it. He started calling me stupid that I believed that they could even detect such a thing. Well, when they finally detected gravitational waves in 2015 and won the Nobel Prize in Physics soon after, it felt really good saying, "I told you so," which only happened in my head because I hated that guy and would never actually reach out to him, lol. But screw you, Jeff. You were wrong and I was right. Story 15. Got a job at a doggy daycare. I'd gone to school for dog training and had been doing that for a while privately, but had moved to a new area and wanted a steady gig. Everyone there knew I had a lot of experience. All new dogs get a half-day trial for free just to see if they're a good fit for daycare. New dog comes in, maybe 70 pounds, gets put into one of the kennels to chill for a bit. I go in with a bowl of water and bend to sit it down. He politely but firmly asks me to leave. I apologize, back out slowly, shut the door, and tell the supervisor that dad needs to come back and get the kiddo. He says I'm overreacting. I tell him that dog, in no uncertain terms, told me that he was extremely uncomfortable and biting was an option. So the dude blows me off. Again, he knows I have years of experience. Dude goes into the kennel. I'm barely 5'5" and my supervisor was 6'3". Walks towards the dog, reaches for dog. Dog bites the heck out of his hand. Guy walks out right past me, says nothing to me. Tells reception girl to call owner to pick up the dog. Guy goes to hospital. Owner comes and gets dog. Dog very relieved and happy. Supervisor, well, less happy and more holy. Me, smug and smiling. Story 16. The roof on my grandparents' house was starting to look bad, to the point that when a guy in their neighborhood would come by to do odd jobs, Grandpa would have him sweep off the roof and bits of shingles would be on the ground. I kept telling him the house needed a new roof, but he would tell me I didn't know what I was talking about. It was fine and it wasn't leaking. I finally said, "It may not be leaking now, but it will soon. Then you'll have to pay for a new roof and water damage." My grandmother agreed with me and insisted he call someone to look at the roof. Guess what? The roof was deteriorated and there was water damage, so a simple roof replacement turned into water damage repair and a new roof. I was with him when the roofer showed him the brittle shingles and pointed to the damage over the front porch. Grandpa sighed, looked at me, and said, "Go ahead and say it." I said, "I told you so. Now, when I say something like this, I hope you will take me seriously." Grandma piped up and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'll make sure he does." Story 17. I'd suffered a family emergency and had to go back to my hometown for the weekend. That weekend, my manager last minute put me onto a morning shift without informing me, so I ended up missing it. It was the only shift I'd ever missed. From that point on, that same manager was incredibly awful to me just for one missed shift. I went into the store one day to buy my friend some stuff with my staff discount when, unfortunately, this manager was working. He came up with a bogus excuse to not give me the discount, so I rolled my eyes and said whatever, but then he continued, "Why did you miss another shift last Monday?" I look at him confused because since my previous missed shift, I checked my roster every day and knew for sure I hadn't been rostered on a Monday. I told him so, but he insisted, "You missed it again, you need to check your rosters more carefully." I told him once again I wasn't rostered on, at which point he went to the back room and grabbed the roster to show me the name next to the Monday slot he was talking about. It wasn't mine. Instead, it was the only other brown girl who worked in the store. We look nothing alike and have very different names. Our only shared trait is our skin tone. The manager apologized profusely, luckily, and gave me a double discount on what I was buying and was slightly nicer to me after that. But yes, big I told you so moment there. Story 18. I worked at a fairly busy gas station, convenience store, closing shift. My boss at the time only ever scheduled a couple people to get everything done before close, and we were always mystified when it inevitably wasn't due to the sheer customer volume. I told him time and time again we needed more night staff. He understood it was busy, but claimed we just needed to work more efficiently. Most stores in our chain operate fine with just 2 closers, so it's what he was used to, I guess. Finally, we broached this topic while I happened to be in the office with him one day. He goes, "Look, I'll show you the exact staffing recommendations per our company's metrics, and you'll see we're right in line for our needs." He brings up some document that makes staffing suggestions by the hour based on customer flow, and we both fall silent when we see, for our store, we were recommended a full 5 people right up until close. Not 2, 5. I just looked at him, didn't say a word. He kind of awkwardly balked for a moment, going, it says, huh. To his credit, he did make efforts to put more people on at night, but there were rarely enough bodies to go around. Still, it was nice to have the validation. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 19. Buddy's girl cheated on him when she went on a quote-unquote business trip. He found out about it from one of her coworkers who sent photos. When she came back, he'd already packed her things and put them out in storage. She knocked on the door and was trying to get back in. I was in the living room, asked if they could talk. He said maybe tomorrow. She came over the following day. I was gone by then. They talked. Afterwards, he called me and said she wanted a sayonara screw for closure. Told him to wear a condom or not at all. She said he didn't have any. Told him to put it off for as long as possible then. They ended up having intimacy a few weeks later. Called me, told me about it. Asked if he wore a rubber and there was a pregnant pause. Was like, dude, when she calls you in a few days and tells you she's pregnant, you damn well better get an amnio as soon as it's possible. Well, of course, a week later she calls and says she's pregnant and it was his. He decided to man up, kept telling him she has insurance, you're not certain it's your kid, get an amnio and then go from there. Told him it'd save him in the long run to know 2 months and then to end up paying for L&D for another man's kid. Well, he didn't, and he paid for L&D upfront because it's a hell of a lot cheaper only to find out the kid wasn't his. Not like, let's get a test and be certain, but like the doctors and nurses were like, oh no, that kid is definitely not yours. Story 20. In 1984, I got a job as director of a mainframe academic computer center in a major university to move to a job in aerospace. I had a meeting with several professors and administrators just before I departed. At the end of the meeting, I asked who they were going to replace me with. The person they had chosen had good paper qualifications, but I knew him to be unscrupulously self-serving. I also knew that he didn't have enough character to fill the role, but I said nothing. They noticed that I was less than enthusiastic and asked if I had any objection. I told them, no. In the end, you'll hire who you hire. However, I will stick my neck out and predict that if you do hire Steve, you will regret it. Thing is, all of us in the room were in the business of using the computer to make predictions, which is why I put it that way. They pressed me, only a little, and I simply said, just sticking my neck out. It's been a privilege to work with you, gentlemen. I'll leave out the part where Steve removed all IMB PCs from the shop because they competed with the mainframe, even though the students all had their theses in Word, and many of the foreign students didn't know PCs. It was a rather disruptive protest. The best part was when 3 months later after being hired, he got one of his key punchers pregnant. Story 21. I worked at a physician-owned outpatient dialysis clinic in Texas. All kinds of shady things were going on, blatant Medicare fraud of several types, having social workers hand out samples of prescription meds when only a doc/NP or PA can do that legally, allowing patient care techs with no official education or licensure to refer to themselves as quote-unquote nurses, allowing techs to do tasks that they were not trained for, and that, by law, can only be done by a licensed nurse, and all kinds of shenanigans. I spoke to the manager about my concerns that the unit was in violation of so many laws that would surely get in trouble. She told me, that's the way we do it here in TX. If you can't play along, maybe you should leave. I did quit within the year. I thought about it, but I never did turn them in for anything. A few years later, they were under investigation for Medicare fraud by the feds and state regulators. They had federal monitors on the premises for 6 months. The clinic had to foot the bill for the monitors' hotels and meals for the whole time, plus pay big fines. It was too much for the clinic owners, and they ended up having to sell to a competitor. Story 22. I worked in retail about 8 years ago. A customer came in wanting a refund on an electrical item. I used to work in a secondhand trade store saying it doesn't work and he wants his money back because it's under warranty. Me, do you have the receipt? Him, no. Me, do you have your loyalty card? Him, no. So after some digging around with the serial number, I told him there's no record of this item being in the shop. Him, yes there is. I bought it from this store and you've got a 3-year warranty. Me, we've never had a 3-year warranty in this store. Him, yes you have. Me, no, we haven't. Him telling me our policy even though I've been working there for a little over 2 years. Him, I remember buying it from an orange shop. Me, that shop was a few doors down and has gone bust now. Him, you're wrong. I take a deep breath. Me, call your bank and ask them to do a check on where you bought that item from, and I guarantee it wasn't from here. It was the shop that used to be there. Him, just you watch. I'll call my bank up and prove you wrong. He stands at the front door to get signal, drops his head in defeat, and walks out the door with his tail between his legs. And that was a very satisfying I told you so moment. Story 23. When I started high school, I cut my hair and started to dye it in every possible color. In the first year of high school, there was no problem with it, but between first and second year, there was a big change in the education system in my country. Because of that, my high school decided to be more strict. So in the first week of September, my teachers were telling me that I had to dye it to some natural color because of school rules. I said that there was no rule that was telling me that I couldn't have colorful hair. After another week, the principal of the school came to my class and told me that I had to change my hair and showed me a school rule book that said that, quote, students have to be neatly dressed, not to have extravagant hairstyles or an outfit that explicitly shows belonging to some social group. I confidently said that this rule didn't apply to my hair and that I still legally could have it. She was in pure shock and started to read this to me again. Then I pulled out my phone because I was, of course, ready for this conversation. I read that 1. Hairstyle, by definition, at least in my native language, is the way you cut and style your hair, not the color of your hair. And to prove that, I showed the official dictionary site. Second, by our law, schools can only dictate the clothes of students, not makeup, hair, or tattoos. I almost got kicked out of school because of this, but it was worth it. Story 24. This dude at my school, a senior, wanted to fight me because I was just in his victim range, a tad bit shorter, nice, doesn't seem capable of defending themselves. He asked if I wanted to fight, but I declined because I do boxing and the lifestyle around me matters to me and my coach. After constant bugging, he asked if I wanted to hang out in a field. I brought both my friends because it just seemed shady, but at the same time, he seemed genuine about just wanting to hang out. So I met up with him, and to my surprise, he bought 2 pairs of boxing gloves and told me to fight. I kept declining, but his friends were recording laughing at me for being a scaredy cat. I really did not want this going around the school since I'm already pretty introverted, so I accepted. He gave me 16-ounce gloves while he had 12-ounce. Keep in mind I'm around 2 years younger than this dude, so I was pretty nervous. We got to boxing and I won within 2 minutes. I could have kept the match going, but his legs seemed like they were about to give out. Now he doesn't really propose the idea to me, so there's that. Story 25. Worked at a printing place as a manager. I'm doing a good job, but HR keeps pestering the employees of my department because of little things. I finally had enough of her just constantly riding my guys, so I pulled her into a meeting with her and the owner of the company. We hashed things out and ended with him telling her to not bring issues unless they are brought to her. So a few weeks fly by, and I notice they put an ad out for my position. I speak to my boss about it, and he's unaware of who they could possibly be hiring. I talked to HR, and they said yes, they were looking for a manager to oversee all the departments, not just mine. They eventually hired this lady that, well, for the lack of a better term, was much too soft to be in that position. She was appeasing the customers by basically giving in to every one of their demands and just bending over backwards, practically giving away the store. I refused to help train or educate her regarding the workflow, considering she was supposed to be my superior. Then one day I got pulled in and was told my position was being eliminated because the new manager should be fine on her own. I told the owner of the company it's a mistake to let me go because she really can't do her job and she'll be leaving within the next 2 weeks. She didn't even make it a week after I was let go. HR decided to fire everyone in the customer service department and hire all new people. That crap imploded faster than the sub with those rich people. It took them a few months to fix her screw up, and from what I've heard from the people that still work there, they took a major hit. Story 26. I had a set schedule doing night stalking at a grocery store during school. Worst managers I've ever dealt with. Bunch of little wannabe drill sergeants getting beer with friends one night, literally a few doors down. I had adjusted my schedule one night the week before, but confirmed my schedule was back to normal. Get a call from one manager being a schmuck. So, are you just not coming in tonight? I told him I was off and that if he penciled me in, that's not enough notice and not a problem. He says he's looking right at the schedule, and I told him he should probably make sure he's got the right one and made it clear I wasn't going to come in. He makes some threats and hangs up. I had a fun night, checked the schedule for my next shift, and sure enough, I was right. Well, guess who didn't show up, who was scheduled because they were looking at last week's schedule? Yep, same manager. No one on the crew had the keys to the truck we're supposed to unload. Store manager is furious. He's getting phone call after phone call, and we finally get let into the truck. He shows up 4 hours later, claims to be sick. We all just couldn't stop laughing. Story 27. When I was 18, I went to the gas station to check the tire pressures of my car. In this gas station, you had to get the meter from the counter and then connect it to the air pipe with a quick coupling. Easy enough thing. I did it, but it didn't work. There was no air pressure, no air coming from the pipe. Obviously, the line for pressurized air was not open. There was a garage in the station and this worker dude there, so I went to him and told him that there was no air coming, that he could open the valves for it. Oh God, the guy was so annoyed that I dared to interrupt his work with my stupidity. With a really annoyed voice, he told me there is air, how can you not know how to use it? I told him that I can use it just fine, but there is no air. He was all huffing and puffing and rolling in his eyes for the stupid little witch that could not use the simplest little thing in the world. Sigh, okay, fine, I'll show you how it works. And we went there, he tried it, and it didn't work. He went away and came back after maybe 10 minutes. Yeah, the valves were not open. It works now. And he quickly slipped away. Story 28. I worked at a theater arts camp for a summer. My friend group, primarily black as myself, were pestered by the higher-ups. The camp also hired many people from overseas who were always favored. It was an overnight camp, and my campers came to complain about my co-bunk head. She was never watching our kids, and they said they didn't feel safe with her. The camp had a number of organizational issues. Campers weren't allowed to contact their families. They took the SIM cards out of the kids' phones. The camp lacked emotional support for the campers, and counselors had no real training. After I was wrongly fired after being pestered by overseas staff and directors, and after they falsely accused my friend of harming a child, all of the camp leadership stepped down and the entire organization had to regroup. The camp now has new leadership, and I laugh when they promote diversity and inclusion, when the camp stood on nothing that it was founded on. Story 29. I was working with two guys who were total schmucks to me on a project, and they regularly ignored me and my qualifications, were dismissive of my attempts to contribute my expertise, and so on. I'm a woman in a male-dominated technical field, if that provides context. They wanted to use a particular model of a part for our project, which had to interface with the portion I was primarily responsible for, but this model wasn't suited for it. They only wanted to use it because they were enamored by some of the features it had that actually were not relevant to us, and we were not going to have that time to implement it. I pointed this out and was dismissed even though I laid out exactly why this model would not work. It was not rocket science. Basically, imagine if you have a stage rated for 200 pounds, and someone weighs exactly 200 pounds wants to river dance on it. At some point, that stage is likely to collapse, and that's exactly what happened. Did they acknowledge their error and say, wow, Purple Flame 8, we're sorry, you were right? No, they wanted to order another of the same model. I went to our superior and explained the situation, but he let them try to reorder the model regardless. At this point, though, that model was difficult to obtain and we needed the part due to a looming deadline. But neither of these guys were getting back to me, so after communicating with our superior, I chose a model that was appropriate for our project and ordered it. This resulted in stupid number one flipping out on me and screaming at me at one point. He later obtained another of the insufficient models. That one disappears. I asked the guy who had it, stupid number one, what happened to it, and he refused to answer and just waved it off and said we would be using the model I ordered. Story 30. I had an ex I found had impregnated one of the girls he cheated with. She was 19 and just starting college. I learned that he was telling her they'd make a life together, that he loved her and wanted to marry her and be there for his child. She ate it all up. Other friends of his thought the girl was lying about being pregnant, but I wasn't so convinced. I wrote her a heartfelt email about how I'd never overstepped in my relationship with my ex before, but that I knew what he was saying to her and that I wish I'd known how horrible the guy was when we were just starting out, because I like to think I'd have run the other direction. I tried to tell her not to throw her life away on him and at least that she should have all the facts. She wrote me a nasty email back, of course, that he'd told her how crazy I was and such. About a year later, she wrote to me again to say that he broke up with her in the hospital room right after she'd given birth, and she was in the process of taking him to court for child support. I don't think he's in their lives at all, 13 plus years later. He's certainly not in mine. Story 31. When my friend, who happened to be my cousin's girlfriend before, got pregnant by a third party, I'd caught her cheating many times. There were people reporting to me, but she always denied it back then. Until one night came, she left their house because, according to her, she had a fight with her mom. I know my mother, and she doesn't want to meddle with things like these, so she didn't sleep at our place that night. Also, she notified me that she already had a place to stay overnight. It's her friends. 1 month later that day, I saw some changes in her, especially physical changes, so yes, I had a gut feeling that she was pregnant. I told my cousin, but he didn't believe me. They're still together with my cousin this time, 1 or 2 months later again. We caught him sending a private message to the third party, and she said it was an entry to April Fool's, but a part of me didn't believe that. And then 5 months later, we got the news confirming that she is pregnant. Story 32. I told my mom that teachers don't listen to their students at school, sampling all the times me and my friends are asking for something academic related, and we either get blatantly ignored or simply rejected. I tell my mom that if she wants something to happen, she should stop making me do all the talking, because nobody listens. She wouldn't believe me, so I told her to go message my teacher using my account and pretending to be me. 3 weeks later, the teacher saw my message and ignored it. So I told my mom that she should message again with a reminder of her previous message, but introduce herself as, well, my mom. Not even a few minutes later, she got an instantaneous reply from the teacher. The funnier thing is that she requested the same thing me and my friends requested weeks earlier and originally got rejected. When we requested it, it was immediately rejected, but when my mom requested the same thing, the teacher was so kind and polite in immediately allowing her request. This happened a lot of times until my mom learned the secret rule of starting your every message with, "Hello, this is the parent of name," to get an immediate response. 4 months later, I still get my mom to do everything because the teachers either reject us or don't listen at all, but listen to the parents and reply immediately. Story 33. My last job, in a nutshell. Nobody ever listened to me as I was just a low-level plebe, despite the fact that those above me seemed to know less about things than I did. One was they screwed me over after 2 years of working there by trying to merge my job, already far too much for one person and paid minimum wage, with another full-time position for the same wage and told me I had to reapply. I did because I was desperate and stupid but didn't get the job. Warned them that they were going to take a huge hit as there was no way in heck they could expect one person to do my job and an entire other job, especially for that pay. They ignored me. Now, 6+ months on, and I'm in a much better job, and a lot of the stuff associated with my original role has absolutely tanked, which is exactly what I said would happen as a poor sod who took over from me does not have time to do both roles. Another one was my old manager at that same job who wanted to get some printed promo work done but was adamant on including a rating the business had, even though the review for the rating was due imminently. I told her not to do that, as if the rating changed, they'd have to sink thousands into reprinting it all. It wasn't necessary to have this rating on at all. She brushed it off, and guess what? Just after I left, the review happened, and they got an even worse rating, so are going to have to reprint all the crap they printed as they legally can't have the wrong rating on it. Screw that place, they never listen to me. Story 34. I got called in to cover a point in park, aka direct traffic, for a Halloween party one night. It was fun and easy, and I was goofing off with all the guests wearing stuff as they went in. I'm good with people, and they were having a ball. I was about to wrap it all up, and this guy pulls up and parks this massive vintage Cadillac. It was long, like a great white shark. He rolled into the fire lane and oils out. I let him know he can't park there, and he's all, I don't give a crap. I tried another tactic and said, there's a spot out back, I'll move it, you'll be safe. You're not touching this car. My boss, a nice enough fellow, came out and told him again that he can't park there. It's illegal. The guy let my boss park it horizontally to the street in front of the building, the same way you display a prize sale at an auto lot. He gave me a shrug and said schmuck before I cut out for the night. The second he opened the door and went to his party, a fleet of teens cruised past with about 24 eggs. Trick or treat, witch, they screamed and coated the car from end to end. Yoke landing inside, outside, everywhere. Like I said, a very fun night. And if you enjoy these stories, there's more for you at YouTube. Thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.